Let's do a trig review. So if we look at our trig review, again, on this quiz that you're going to be doing is just graphing. So first thing we want to do here is we want to get this into the right form. So big thing is to factor out b. Factor out b first. So that means you're going to rewrite this as y is equal to the cosine of, well, when I look at this, that's really just 1/2 x minus pi over 4. So if I factor out a 1/2, then I ask myself 1/2 times what gives me 1/2 times x, and your answer is x. And then 1/2 times what gives me negative pi over 4, I guess that's going to be negative pi over 2, and then minus 2. Here your amplitude is absolute A, so it's 1. Your range is going to be from -1 to 1 because we haven't changed anything in terms of that. Period is always 2 pi divided by b. So in this case, it's 2 pi divided by 1/2. But dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. So you're going to get 4 pi. Because another way to think of it is, inside of 2 pi, if there's a 1, then you get 1 cycle in 2 pi. If b is 2, then you would get 2 cycles in 2 pi. Or if here, since b is equal to 1/2, you only get a half of a cycle in 2 pi, so that means a full cycle will come in 4 pi. Very good. So step size is always your period divided into 4 pieces. So it's 4 pi divided by 4. In other words, each step is of size pi. So now we're ready to make our chart with our x's, and our y is equal to cosine of x over 2 minus pi over 4 minus 2. So where do our x's start? Well, that would be if we had any vertical or horizontal shift. So just to be clear, our function is y is equal to cosine of 1/2 x minus pi over 2 minus 2. So we probably want to let the reader know that a is 1, b is equal to 1/2, h is equal to pi over 2. That is our new start left to right. And k is equal to -2. That's our new start. That's our midline. Or you can think of it as your new start up and down. That's your midline. So our midline is going to be down here at y is equal to -2. And so if our period is 1, then we're going to go up 1 and down 1 to get to a peak or a valley away from the midline. We're going to start at that new starting value of pi over 2. So we're going to start right here. We're going to take steps of size pi. So in this case, let me go ahead and, to make our life easier, I'm going to mark over these, right? So on the exam, I will give you graph paper that does not have markings on it. That way you can make the sizes any sizes you want. So this time we are going to start out at, let's see, again, pi over 2 is our new start. So we're going to say that pi over 2 is here. So if every step is pi over 2, in terms of the graph, well, here we see our step size is 1. So this would be 1 step of size pi, be 2 steps of size pi, 3 steps, and this would be 4 steps of size pi. So our starting point is pi over 2, and each time we're going to add pi, but since this has an over 2, that means I want to add 2 pi over 2 each time. So if I add 2 pi over 2, I'm going to get to 3 pi over 2. Add another pi over 2, I'm going to get to 5 pi over 2. Add another one, I'm going to get to 7. And then lastly, I'm going to get to 9 pi over 2. Okay, that's by taking the correct step every time. So this is going to be 3 pi over 2, 5 pi over 2, 7 pi over 2, and 9 pi over 2. We know that the basic cosine is a peak, a midline, a valley, a midline, and a peak. So because it looks like this, and since I have a positive 1 in front, I know I'm going to start off at a peak. So my peak is going to be right here, then a midline, then a valley, and a midline, and then a peak. So for this guy, I need to go ahead and erase just a little bit. I put 9 pi over 2 up here, and so there's going to be my peak. So here's my peak, here's my valley, here's my peak, and that's what my cosine is going to look like. Just to verify, when I look over here at my y values, this is my old cosine. So really I've just got cosine, my old values, and then I do something to them. It seems like I subtract 2 from all my old cosines. So when I do that, I think you're going to see my old cosine values were 1, 0, negative 1, 0, and 1, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, and 1. So that would get me my new values of negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 2, and negative 1. All right, so some main key points in here. Factoring out b first was oh so important. Making sure we had the correct midline, which is where you start left to right. Up and down, so the correct midline. And then we had the correct starting value left to right, which was your h. So that correct starting value. And then we took our step of size 2 pi over 2, also known as pi. Let's do another one. So when we look at this, we don't like the form, so we rewrite it as negative sine of 4x plus pi plus 1, right? But then we remember that we need to factor out b first. Factor out that letter b first. So when we do that, we're going to have y is equal to negative sine of 4 times some stuff plus 1. Well, 4 times what gives you 4x? The answer is x. 4 times what gives you pi? The answer is pi over 4. Another way to think about that is, if you're factoring out a 4, that's the same as taking these terms and dividing by 4. So 4x divided by 4 gets me my x, and pi divided by 4 gets me my pi over 4. So now it should be pretty clear that a is equal to 1. Let me write it over here to where you see it. So if you have y is equal to negative sine of 4, x plus pi over 4 plus 1, a is equal to negative 1, b is equal to 4, h is equal to negative pi over 4, so we start off just a little bit to the left, and k is 1. That's our midline. So again, let me go down here and erase this for you so we can start off with a clean graph and make it whatever step we want to. Okay, so now I come over here, 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 here. Okay, so my midline is at 1, so I draw my nice midline here. At y is equal to 1 is a midline. So I know that my amplitude is the absolute value of a, so it's the absolute of negative 1, so it's 1. So I'm going to go up to a peak of 1 and down to a valley of negative 1. So my range is from it's from 0. We see now that it's from 0 to 2, right? Because for midlines at 1, we're going to go up to 2 and down to 0. Sorry, up to 2 and down to 0 because I've taken a step of 1 either way. Okay, so 2 and 0. Our period is always 2 pi divided by b, so it's 2 pi divided by, in this case, b is 4. So it means that my period, or how long it takes to make one cycle, is pi over 2. So my step size is always period divided by 4, so it's pi over 2 divided by 4, but that's the same as pi over 2 times 1/4. So get pi over 8 is how big each step is going to be. So I'm going to start here at negative pi over 4, and each step I take is going to be pi over 8. Okay? That's where my x values, where my y values are negative sine. You can think of that as -1 times the sine of, 4x plus pi over 4, and then plus 1. Right? All right. So this is going to be my starting value, negative pi over 4, and I'm going to add pi over 8 when I take a step. So because my steps are in eighths, I'm going to change my starting value to also be in eighths. Oop. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise this just a little bit. That means I need to put back this white right here. So that means if my starting value is usually negative pi over 4, if I hit that with a 2 over 2, I get negative 2 pi over 8 is really where I start from, and then add 1/8 each time. So I'm going to be back here at, okay, so I'm ready for my starting value over here. Again, I go up to 2 and down to 0. So my starting value is going to be negative 2 pi's over 8. And I take a step size of 1/8, I get to negative pi over 8. And then I take another step of pi over 8, I get to 0. I take another step of pi over 8, and I get to pi over 8. And I take one step of pi over 8, and I get to 2 pi's over 8. So let's see, 2 pi's over 8. Let's see how many steps we've taken. Again, we started back here at negative 2 pi over 8, and it seems like we took 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, so we've made a complete cycle. Okay, well, what are some things that we know? We know that the basic sine graph goes midline, peak, midline, valley, midline, right? And so from that, since I'm doing negative sine, I still start at 0, but then instead of going to a peak, so I still start at 0, which my new 0, my new midline, the y is equal to 1. So I started a midline. Instead of going up to a peak, negative sine starts at 0 and goes to a valley. Then it goes 0, peak, 0. So this would be negative sine. So I'm going to go to a valley, a midline, a peak, and a midline. It's going to look like that. Let's go back and check those values over here to make sure we understand where that came from. So to finish the chart, when I look at this, I see my old sine values, and you've just done two things to them. First, you've multiplied them by -1, and then you've added 1. So when you do that, our original sine values were 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. So this would give you 1, 0, 1. So 1, 0, 1, 2, and 1. And yes, it gives us what we wanted: 1, 0, 1, 2, and 1, just like we thought earlier. So great work. Let's do another one. Cosine. As always, try and stop the video now, see if you can do it on your own, and then we'll talk. It's only helpful if you try it on your own. So pause the video now, try it on your own. While you pause the video, I'm going to come over here and make some more room for what we're about to do. So let me go ahead and clear all these off. So let's see, now that you're back, make sure again that you've already tried it. So we're going to say, look, you need to factor out b first. By factoring out b first, we would have cosine of 2 x minus pi over 2 plus 2, right? Because when you factor out b, when you factor out 2, that b, it's the same as taking this term and dividing by 2 to get x, and taking this term and dividing by 2 to get pi over 2. So it should be pretty clear now that our a is 1/2, our b is equal to 2, our h is equal to positive pi over 2, and our k is equal to 2. Our 2 is our midline, and our new starting value, left to right, is positive pi over 2. Okay. All right, the amplitude is absolute A, so it's absolute 1/2, which is a half. So let's think, if our midline is up here at 2, so here's 2, y is equal to 2 is our midline, and my amplitude is a half, then I'm only going to go up a half up here to 2.5. I'm going to go down a half to 1.5. So that's going to be our range. It's from 1.5 to 2.5. Okay, the period is 2 pi over b. So in this case, it's 2 pi over 2, which is pi. But our step size is the period divided by 4. So it's just going to be pi over 4. So then we come over here to our chart, and I know that I've got x values, and I've got y is equal to 1/2 cosine of 2x minus pi over 2 plus 2. My starting value is pi over 2. We saw that here from h. And then every step I take is going to be of size pi over 4. So since every step is pi over 4, I'm going to rewrite this in terms of fourths, and it's going to be 2 pi over 4. We get that by multiplying this by the well-chosen one of 2 over 2. So 2 pi over 4 is our first step. 2 pi over 4 is our first step, 2 pi over 4. Then I take one step of size pi over 4 to 3 pi over 4, and then 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and then the last step is to 6 pi over 4. Right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and then to 6. We start here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Right? Okay, since this is a cosine function, I know that the basic cosine function starts at a peak, midline, then goes to valley, midline, peak. So basic cosine looks like this. All right? So that means here, in terms of mine, it's going to start off at a peak, which is up here at 2.5. Goes to a midline of 2, a valley of 1.5, a midline of 2, and a peak of 2.5. It's going to come down like this. It's going to be nice and rounded at each peak and each valley. And so it's going to look something like this, right? Rounded. And so let's verify these. So what do we have every time? I have cosine. All those old cosine values, you've done two things to them. You multiply each one by 1/2. And then you add 2, right? So cosine is 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. This is going to be 2.5, 2, 1.5, 2, and 2.5, just like we saw earlier. Isn't that cool? So one way to finish it off is by thinking about what cosine looks like, and another way is to finish with the chart. Right? Let's do number 4. So try it on your own, hit pause, and then we'll do it together. No, seriously, hit pause. Try it. Okay. So we know that the first thing to do is to factor out b. Factor out b. So what does that mean? This is negative 2 sine of 2 is the coefficient on x, the number in front of x. So that's what we factor out. How do we factor it out? We take this term and divide by 2 to get x. We take pi over 3 and divide by 2, but dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by half, so we get pi over 6. And notice that there's a plus 0. So it should be pretty clear now that a is equal to negative 2, b is equal to 2, h is equal to pi over 6, and k is equal to 0. So this is our midline. H is our new starting value, left to right. So my new starting value, so let me go down here and clean this up. So let me clean this up for you, and again, I'll make sure that this is, this. I'll make sure that you have a graph paper that does not have these marked on it. Okay, so what does that mean? That means if we start off at a positive pi over 6, we'll do that in just a minute. So the period is 2 pi over b. In this case, that would be 2 pi over what? 2, so it's pi. That means every step side is period over 4, so it's going to be pi over 4. So we're going to start at pi over 6, but take steps of size pi over 4. Okay? So I think it's pretty clear if you take 6 and 4, their least common multiple is going to be 12. The number that they both go into easily but is least is 12. So that means over here, our new starting value, we said we read it as pi over 6, but I'm going to hit it with 2 over 2, and that's going to make it 2 pi over 12. So we're going to start at 2 pi's over 12, right? Let's see. So we'll start right here at 2 pi over 12 is what this is, right? So there's 2 pi over 12. And I'm going to take one step of pi over 4, but I want that in twelfths. So I'm going to hit it with 3 over 3 and get 3 pi over 12. So I'm going to take step of 3 pi over 12 and get to 5 pi over 12. Take another step of 3 pi over 12 and get to 8 pi over 12. Take another step of 3 pi over 12, get to 11 pi over 12. Yeah, I had to think about that for a second. I need more coffee. And then we get 14 pi over 12 for our last step. Okay. Whoa, 14. Is that right? Yes. So that means I'm going to let these be the even ones. So this is going to be 2 pi over 12, my first mark, and then here's 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Is that okay? So there's 2 pi over 12, and then I guess if that's 2 pi over 12, then halfway in the middle, if that's 4, this is going to be, I'll make it red. This is going to be 5 pi over 12. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8. Here's 8 pi over 12. 10. Here's 11 pi over 12. And the last one is 14 pi over 12. So there's 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step. Right? Where those are our x's, and our y's, don't forget, are negative 2 sine of 2x minus pi over 6. And when I look at those, what I really see is just our old y values that got multiplied by 2. So let's check it up here. Our amplitude is absolute A, which is absolute negative 2 is 2. And we said that our midline was 0. So if our midline is 0, that's our midline is y is equal to 0. Then I guess if my amplitude is 2, then I go up and down away from it, positive 2. So I go up to a positive 2 and down to a negative 2, right? So I go a distance of 2 in both directions. I remember that my original sine function goes midline, peak, midline, valley, midline. So that's sine. If I do a negative sine function, it's going to go 0, valley, 0, peak, midline. So it's going to look something like this. So if I start off here, it's going to be 0, then it's going to go down to a valley, then it's going to go to a midline, then it's going to go to a peak, and then it's going to go to a midline. So I'm thinking it should look something like this. Again, it goes on in both directions, but there you go. Let's make sure those y values are correct. So when I look over here, I see negative 2 times my old sine values. So that's going to be negative 2 times these old sine values, well, my original sine values. So those sine values right there, my original sine values, are 0, 1, 0, negative 1, and 0. So 0, 1, 0, negative 1, and 0. So my new outputs should be 0, negative 2, 0, 2, and 0. And yes, that's what we got. 0, negative 2, 0, 2, and 0. Pretty cool. Okay, let's do some secant and cosecant. We just got 2 more to do. Let's look at secant. So instead of drawing secant, I'm going to draw cosine. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw y is equal to 2 plus 1/2 cosine of x. So that means it's going to be a half of a cosine plus 2. So this is really the thing I'm going to draw, and I'm going to use that to get me secant at the very end. And the fact I'm going to use is that secant is equal to 1 over cosine. They are inverses of one another, multiplicative inverses. So the period of this thing, period is 2 pi over b. So 2 pi over b means it's going to be what? 2 pi over 1/2, so it's 4 pi. So that's my period. But then my step size is going to be period over 4, so that means each step is going to be of size pi. Right? So if I come down here and clean this up for you, let me give myself some room. So it looks like if I read my equation pretty quickly, I can see that a is equal to 1/2, b is equal to 1, h is not there, so it's 0, and k is equal to 2. Right? So that's going to be my midline is going to be 2. So my midline is up here at y is equal to 2. My amplitude is absolute A, so it's absolute 1/2 or half. So that means I go up a half to a peak of 2.5, and I go down a half to a valley of 1.5. So that's where my peaks and my valleys are going to be, right? And then my starting value is going to be 0 as per usual. So when I look at this thing, my regular cosine is a peak, a 0, a valley, a 0, and a peak. So that's my regular cosine. So that means if I start off at 0 and each step is of size pi, then it's going to be 0, maybe I make this 1 pi, 2 pi's, 3 pi's, and 4 pi's. So there's my 1, 2, 3, 4 steps where if I'm doing cosine, it goes peak, 0, midline, valley, midline, peak. We're going to go a peak of 2.5, a midline, a valley of 1.5, a midline, and then a peak of 2.5. So it's going to look like that. Right, so that's what cosine looks like. And so that means if I need to draw secant, so just to make sure, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to draw x, and I'm going to draw what? 1/2 cosine of x plus 2. We said that we started out at 0, and each step was of size 1/2. So that's why we got pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi for our 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. And if you have 1/2 cosine x plus 2, I really need you to view that as taking 1/2 times all your old cosine values and then adding 2. So it's 1/2 my old cosine values plus 2. My original cosine value, the parent function, is 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. So if I work this out, that's 2 plus 1/2 is 2.5. This is 2. This is 1.5. This is 2. And this is 2.5. So you see why we got what we got on the right. So now if I go and I draw a cosecant, then everywhere where there was a 0, so cosine x equals 0 means that secant x has a vertical asymptote. So that's here and here, right? And we know that cosine x peak means that secant x has a valley. So we have a valley right here, yes, but it explodes up. We know that cosine x having a valley means that secant of x has a peak. So here's a peak for cosecant, but it explodes down as you get closer and closer to the vertical asymptote. So that's what your secant is going to look like. That's secant of x. Right? I'm not going to mess with vertical asymptotes again. That would be a bonus type question. We can discuss that in class. And the last one that we're going to do on this video is 1 minus cosecant. First thing I'm going to do is, instead of cosecant, I'm going to do sine, because cosecant x is 1. Cosecant of x is 1 over sine. So I'm going to leverage that fact to come in here and graph this sucker. So this is going to be step size here in a minute. So I'm going to do 1 minus the sine of 2x minus pi. But that's negative sine of 2x minus pi plus 1 when I switch the order. But then I have to factor out b. So I get 2x minus pi over 2 plus 1. So the amplitude is absolute A, so it's absolute negative 1, which is 1. Yes. Hey, what's up?
Here to take a test.
You're here to take a test?
Yes.
Oh, we'll have to do it during class.
Oh, that's fine.
Yes? Okay, we'll just do it during class, because you don't necessarily have enough time, yes?
I have like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Is it long?
No, yeah, we can go ahead and do it. So just leave your stuff here.
Okay.
Let me stop this.
I usually